Hello everyone, welcome to learn data structures and algorithm in Python course. Today we'll be exploring what is flow controls in Python and we'll be discussing about functions. So let's get started. First, what is flow control in Python? So in Python, there are two kinds of flow control statement. First is called conditional statement or decision making statement, and the second is called looping statement. So first, take a look what is conditional statement or decision making statement. So conditional statement means when there is a requirement to perform some task or operation based on some condition, then we use conditional statement. For this in Python, we have this if-else statement. So what is the syntax of it? First, it will check for a condition, and if the condition is true, then this first statement will execute. Else, if the condition is false, then it will go to this if block and execute this statement. So this is the statement. And there is another thing, elif means in spite of one condition, if there are multiple conditions, then we use this elif. So here first it will check for condition 1, then if condition 1 is true, then it will execute this statement. Otherwise it will check for condition 2, then if condition true is true, it will execute the statement 2, then the remaining code will not be executed. But if condition 2 is also false, then it will check for condition 3, and if condition 3 is false, then it will go for else block. Let's try to understand in our Visual Studio Code. Let's first try to write a code to check a number is even or not. If the number is even, then print even. If the number is odd, then print the number is odd. But what is the condition for checking the number is even or odd? The condition here should be if the number is divisible by 2, then we can say this number is even, or it is not divisible by 2, then we can say it is odd number. Let's create a variable called num and assign some value to it. Let's 20. Now let's write if, then the condition num modulo 2 equals to 0, then print this is an even number, right? Or else print this is an odd number. So here first it will check if the number is divisible by 2 or not. If it is divisible by 2, then this statement will be executed. Otherwise this statement will be executed. Let's try to run this and see what is the output. So currently this number is an even number. Now let's change this and now see. So currently this is an odd number, right? So this is basically if else statement. Now take another example. Let's assume you and your friend is playing a game, and the rule of the game is if you score more than your friend, then you win, or if your friend score more than your score, then your friend will win. If the score of you and your friend are equal, then it is tie. So let's create two variable, uh, your score equals to, assume it is 40, and friend score equals to, assume it is 60. Now if your score is greater than your friend's score, then we can say print you win. Else if your friend's score is greater than your score, then we can say friend wins, right? Or else, what is it? Print tie. So now let's try to execute this code. First clear this out, and now if I run this code, so currently your score is 40 and your friend's score is 60, means your friend's score is more than your score. So that is why your friend wins. Now if both of your score are equal, so that must be a tie, right? So this is basically use of else if. Next, take another example. Let's given a number, so you have to print if the number is divisible by 15, then you have to print fizz bars. And similarly, if it is divisible by 5, then you have to print fizz, or if it is divisible by 3, then you have to print bars, or else just print the number. So what is the problem? I'll be giving you a number. You have to check first if it is divisible by 15, then print fizz bars. Now if the number is not divisible by 15 but it is divisible by 5, then print fizz. And if it is not divisible by 5 and not divisible by 15 but it is divisible by 3, then you print bars, or else you print the number. So let's try to write the code for this problem. So let's take a number variable num equals to assume 30. Now if number modulo 15 equals to 0, then just print fizzbuzz, and else if the number modulo 5 equals to 0, then just print face, or if the number modulo 3 is 0, then print buzz, or else just print the number. Now let's try to run this code. So currently the number is 30. So 30 is divisible by 15, right? So that's why it is printing fizzbuzz. And when it is printing this fizzbuzz, this remaining code will not be executed. So first it will check for this first condition. If first condition is first, then this statement will be executed and the remaining code will not be run. Now, if the first condition will not satisfy, let's assume the number is 20. Now, first it will check for if the number is divisible by 15 or not. 20 is not divisible by 15. Then it will not execute this statement 1. So then it will go to this block and will check for if the number is divisible by 5 or not. So it will be divisible by 5, right? Then it will print face, and then the next remaining code will not be executed. Let's try to run this. You can see now it is printing this face because the 20 is divisible by 5. Now if I take 21, then what will happen? First it will check for divisible by 15 or not, then it will be false. Next it will be check for divisible by 5, then it will this condition will also fail. Then it will go for this one, then it will check that it is divisible by 3, then it will print bars. Yes. And now if we take 22, so then three of them will not be satisfied, then it will print the number, right? Let's try to print this. So when you execute this, now you can see, let's clear it out. Now if I just run the code, so it will give me 22. So this is the conditional statement in Python. What is next? Next, looping statement. Looping statements are very useful when there are some repetitive tasks are performed depending on some condition. There are condition. Let's try to understand. Uh, let's just remove the code. Assume I'm telling you to print hello world. So just print hello world. Right? Now, if I just tell you to print this hello world for 10 times, what will you do? You will print for the 10 times, right? 10 times, right? Now if I tell you to write this hello world for 1000 times, now this is a problem, right? For this repetitive task, we use looping statement in Python. Let's see what it is. First, while loop. So the syntax of while loop will look like this. First, we have to give a condition. If the condition is true, then it will execute this code block continuously until the condition is false. Let's look at it. Now, if we just want to replace this with some while loop, so what is the task here? The task here is to print hello world, right? So this is the task, but we have to perform this task repeatedly, right? For this, we'll use while loop, while then condition, then some condition, and then this repetitive task. So this is the syntax. Now, what will be the condition here? The condition here is I tell you to print it 10 times. But how do you count that it is 10 times or 1000 times or 100 times? For that, we need a variable to store the count. So let's create a variable called count equals to assign some value to it. Let's 0. Let's 0. Now, when you print hello world, then we'll just increment the count. Count plus equals to 1, right? So for the first time, it will execute the code. Then the count will be incremented by 1. Now, what will be the condition? I'm telling you to write this hello world for 10 times, right? So for this, condition will be count have to less than 10. Now let's try to understand. First, the count is 0. So then it will enter in the while loop and it will check for if the count is less than 10 or not. Let's try to put it here itself. Let's create a code block. Okay, now let's see. First, what will happen? First, we are initializing a variable count with 0. So count is initially 0. So it will this line will be executed. Okay, next it will enter into while loop. So in while loop, first it checks for the condition. The condition is count should be less than 10, right? So currently the count is 0. So first look at steps and then count, right? Okay, in step 1 the count is 0, so 0 is less than 10, so this condition is true. Then it will print hello world, right? Then what will be the count? Count will be incremented by 1, so count becomes, so in the next step count becomes 1, and it will go back to this loop again, and it will check for this count is now 1, and 1 is less than 10 or not. Yes, it is less than 10. Now this condition is true, then it will print hello world again, and then count is incremented by 1, so count will be 2. Then it will check for this is step 3. Then it will check if this count is less than 10 or not. Yes, it is less than 10. Then again it will print hello world and then increment the count by 1. So in the fourth step the count will be 3, so on. Now when the count is 9, then 9 is less than 10, then it will print hello world and then increment the count by 1, then count become 10. Now count has changed to 10. Now it will go back to this loop again and check for, now count is become 10. Now check for 10 is less than 10 or not. So this is false, right? 10 is equal to 10, not less than 10. Then this loop will be ended and it will go back to the next line. So this is how while loop works in Python. Now let's try to execute the code. Let's run the code. Now you can see it is printing for 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10, right? For 10 times. So this is how while loop works. Now take another example of printing number from 1 to 10. So write a program to print number from 1 to 10. How do you write this? So to print number from 1 to 10, first we have to start with 1. So let's create a variable num equals to initialize with 1. Now we'll check for if the number is less than equals to 10 or not. If it is less than equals to 10, then we can print the number, and then after printing we'll increment the number by 1, right? So this is the program. Try to run this. Yes, now you can see this is printing from 1 to 10. So first it will be 1, then check for 1 is less than 10 or not, then print the number, then increment by 1, then number becomes 2, and then it will check for 2 is less than 10 or not, then yes it is true, then it will print the number and increment it by 1, and will go so on. But here is the catch. If by mistake you just forget to increment the number, then what will happen? Let's clear this out. Let's see. Let's try to run this. Now it is printing 1 for infinite times. So this loop will not be ended. So it will be continuously running. Why it is happening? Let's try to understand. First the number is initialized with 1. Now it will check. If the number is less than 10, 1 is less than 10, yes. Then it will enter this code block and it will print the number. So number is 1, right? Then it will go back to again in the loop. Now what will be the value of number? Number is still 1 and 1 is less than 10. Then it is also true. Then it will execute this line. So printm 1. Then it will go back to loop again. So this is an infinite loop because we are not incrementing or decrementing this number. That's what happened when we forget to increment. To stop this operation, we have to just press Ctrl C and it will stop executing. Let's clear it out. Okay. Now let's look at for loop. So for loop is works similar as while loop, but there are some advantages in for loop. For loop is used to iterate over a range or iterator. Means in for loop we don't have to define the variable initially, then we have to increment manually. So what we'll have to do in for loop, we'll be giving a range from starting point to ending point and also give the increment here itself. Then we can write the program here in the statement here. So the syntax of for loop is look like this. First for, then iterator variable, then this in keyword, after that the sequence you have to given, then the statements. Let's try it out. Okay, take the same example. If we want to print the number from 1 to 10 in for loop, what we have to do? So in for loop the syntax is for, then the iterator variable. You can name it as you like. So this is an alias. You can name it as you want. So let's name it num. Then in, then you have to put the range. So in Python, there is a special function called range that what will have, that has two things. First, the start, then the stop point, and then the increment. So the first argument is starting point. So from where we want to start, then the ending point, the ending value. So this is excluded. If we want to print from 1 to 10, we have to write it 11 here because 11 will be excluded. And the increment, how much we want to increment this. So in while loop, we were incremented by 1. So that's why we are incrementing by 1. And this is called step. Okay, now let's try to print number. And let's try to execute this code. Now you can see this is works similar. So let's try to understand here how it works. So let's take another code block. First, what is the range? Range is from 1 to 10. 1 to 10 because 11 is excluded and the increment will be 1. So the range will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. So first it will enter into the for loop. First the value of this num will be 1. So this starting value. So the number is starting value 1, then it will print 1. So in step 1 it will be printing 1. Then it will again go back to this loop, and now the number becomes 2. Then the number is 2, then it will print 2. Again it will go back to this loop again. Now the number is 3, it will print 3, and like so on. And when it is when the when the number is 10, then it will print 10, and next the range has ended. So this for loop will be ended, and it will execute the next line of code. So that is how for loop works. Now let's take another example. Write a program to calculate the sum of all integers between 1 to 10. So how do you do that? For that we have to create a variable sum in which we will be storing the result. We will be initializing this sum with 0. Then we'll run this for loop. For, let's take num in range. So what will be the range? The range will be 1 to 10. For that the stop value will be 11. Then increment will be 1. And then what we have to do? Whatever the sum value, will be adding the number to it. So initially sum will be 0. Then we'll add the first number to the sum, the 1 to the sum. Then sum becomes 1, and so on. Now at last, let's print sum. Let's try to execute the program. Now you can see that output is 55, right? So what is happening? Let's copy this and take another code block here. First the sum is 0, right? So this prep sum, then number, then sum. Okay. First the value of sum is 0, right? So we're just writing it, previous sum is 0. Now first line is executed, then it will come to this line here. This is the for loop, right? So for loop will be run from 1 to 10 because 11 is excluded. So first the value of num will be 1, right? Num will be 1, and the previous sum is 0. Then what will be the new sum? New sum will be sum plus number. 0 plus 1 equals to 1, right? Then it will go back to this loop again. Now this previous sum becomes 1 and number becomes 2. What will be the sum? Sum will be 1 plus 2 equals to 3. Now this previous sum becomes 3 and num becomes 3. So sum will be 3 plus 3 equals to 6. Now it will go back to this loop again, and now the previous sum will be 6, number will be 4, then sum will be 6 plus 4 equals to 10. And again, now previous sum is 10, number will be 5, then sum will be 15. Then previous sum will be 15, number will be 6, then the sum will be 15 plus 6 equals to 21. Then previous sum will be 21, then it will be 7, then sum will be 28. Then it will be 28 and number will be 8 and sum will be 28 plus 8 equals to 36. Then previous sum will be 36, number will be 9, so the sum will be 45. Then previous sum will be 45, number will be 10, sum will be 45 plus 10 equals to 55. So the sum will be 55. So this is 55, right? So this is how for loop works in Python. Now there is another thing, break and continue statement. Break and continue. So break is used to terminate the loop, and continue used to skip a particular operation. Let's try to understand. Let's say you have to print the number from 1 to 10. So just for num in range from 1 to 11, and just keep this print number. So it will print number from 1 to 10, right? Now if there is some requirement to terminate this for loop, if we find a number that is divisible by 6, then we can terminate this for loop. Means, let's assume if the number is divisible by 6, means number modulus 6 equals to 0, then what we'll do, we'll just break this loop. So now what will happen, first the number will be 1. Is this number divisible by 6? No. So it will, so this will not execute it, so it will print the number 1. Then for 2 it will print it, for 2 2 will be printed, for 3 3 will be printed, for 4 4 will be printed, and for 5 5 will be printed. Now when the number is 6, 6 modulo 6, it will be 0, right? So this condition will be true. Then this loop will be break. Then after that this code will not be executed, this loop has ended. Then from 6 7 8 9, those will not be printed. Let's try to run this. So now you can see, if the number is 6, then this loop is ended and will not get the remaining numbers from 6 to 10. So this is how break works. Now continue. Let's, in spite of break, just try to write continue. So what continues does, continue actually skip this, means it will print from 1 to 5, it is fine. Now if the number is 6, then it will skip this particular operation. In spite of 6, all the numbers will be printed. Let's try to run this. Now you can see 1 2 3 4 are there. When the number is 6, the modulus 6 is 0, this condition is true, then it will continue, means from here it will go back to the line number 5, and for 6 the number will not be printed, the remaining code will not be executed. And this continue and break always works inside for loop, not outside of it. So that is how for loop and while loop works in Python. Next, functions. What are functions? Functions helps to performing repetitive tasks. Don't get confused. In loop, we perform some repetitive task depending on some condition, but function is different from this. Assume you have written a code, and in your code there is a requirement to check if a number is prime or not. If the requirement is only for once, then you can write code directly inside this code block. But if there are requirement to check for this prime number in multiple times, then for this particular task to check prime number, you have to define a function for this. So function used to do specific task, and this is a block of code that run only when it calls. So to get the result, we always have to invoke the function. We have to call the function. But for loop, we don't have to call the loop. It will run automatically. But for function, we have to invoke them. Now let's take a look. How do we define function in Python? So in Python, to define a function, first we use this def keyword, the name of the function, then we pass parameter to it. And after that, we write a block, and inside the block we execute some code and do some task, then we return some value. So this is the definition of function. How do we define function? Let's try to understand. Let's remove the code, and first let's try to create a function to add two numbers. So how do we define that? First def, then name of the function. Name of the function should be get sum, and it will take two parameters a and b, and what it will return, first it will calculate the sum from these two variables, sum equals to a plus b, then it will return the sum. Now to execute this program, what you have to do, you have to this you have to just invoke the function, and when you invoke the function you have to pass the argument. So you have to put two numbers that you want to add, and now if you execute the code, you'll not get the result. Why? Because it is returning the sum. When you call the function, it is returning the sum, but you are not printing this, right? To show the result, what you have to do, you have to print this, whatever the value is returned, you have to print this. Now if you print this, now you can see you get the result 5, and if you change the value to 20 and 30, now if you just run the code, you'll get 50. So this is how we define functions in Python. And one thing, while we define the function, this variable a and b are called parameters. But when we invoke the function, when we call the function, these are called arguments. So this is the difference between parameter and arguments. When we define the function, those are called parameters, and when we invoke the function, those are called arguments. So that's how we define function in Python. Next, what is lambda function? Lambda function is a small anonymous function. Anonymous function means a function that has no name. So in the previous example, we have shown that our function has a name, and in VS Code also we had a function name as getSum, but anonymous function doesn't have any name. So this lambda function are anonymous functions. Lambda function can't take any number of arguments, so any number of argument, but can only have one expression. This is the syntax of a lambda function. It is a program to check the maximum from two values. So we name it as max of, then we use lambda keyword, then after that we pass argument a and b, then return a if a greater than b, else return b. Means this program is returning the maximum value from those two integers. So now if we print max of 1 or 2, then it will obviously print 2. So this is how lambda function works in Python. Next, now one important thing you have to understand, what is scope? A variable is only available from inside the region it is created. This is called scope. Let's try to understand. Let's create a variable var1 and assign some value 20. Then let's define a function def fun1. What it will does, it will just print var1. Then we have to invoke this function fun1, and we call this function. Now what do you think, what will be the output? Let's try to run this. So output will be 20. This means this variable is accessible to this function, inside this function. Now let's try to understand how functional block works. Let's assume we have created a function and we have written some code here. So we should maintain some space here. This is called indentation, right? You know, already know that. So this thing is called block, functional block. So whatever we write inside this function, that is called block of function. Now suppose inside that block we have created a variable that let's say var1 equals to 20, and now if we print this variable inside this var1, it will give us the output as 20. But if we want to print this outside of this function, outside of this function, let's say var1, then it will throw an error because it will not be accessible outside of it. But if you define another function, inside this fun2, and then just want to print var1 here, var1 here, then it will give you the output as 20. That is correct, but you can't access the variable outside of it. That is what scope is. So inside the region it is created, that is accessible, but outside of the region it is created, that is not possible. So this is basically scope is. Let's try to understand. Let's define another function, def fun1, and now let's create a variable, var2 equals to 30, right? Now if I print here var2 and try to execute this code, okay, we have to invoke this function, fun1, and invoke, and if we run, now it is giving me the output as 30 because we are printing inside this function. But if I now print this outside of that function, now what will be the output? Let's run. So it is giving name error. So name var2 is not defined, right? Var2 is not defined. So this variable can't be accessible outside of this function block. So this is the function block, but outside of this function block, you can't access this variable. But create another block here, if block, if var1 is greater than 10, then what you have to do? Print var2, right? And let's remove this one. So what we are doing, we have created a variable var2 inside this function scope, this function block. Then we are creating another block for this if condition. So inside this block, so this is also another block. Inside this block, we are trying to print this var2. Now see, will it get the result or not? Yes, it is giving 30. Means you can access the variable inside of the scope where it is created. So var2 is created in this scope. So inside this scope, it can be accessible, but outside of this, it can't accessible. So this is the scope. Now another thing, let's create a variable a equals to 20. And if we now print a, it will be printing 20, right? But now define a function def fun, and inside this function redefine a equals to, and assign some different value. If we print this out, print a, uh, to some comment, a inside the fun, and print a here outside of the function. Let's print a, print a of the fun. What do you think? What will be the output? First we have to invoke the function. Let's invoke function, and now let's try to run this. Now you can see a outside of the function is 20. A outside of the function is 20, but a that is defined inside of the function, it is 35. This means you may think when we reassign the value to it, a equals to 35, that might be changed to its original value. So a will get changed and changed to 35, but that is not. This is different, this is different. Those two are different variables. So this variable is created locally when function is called, and when the function is invoked, then this a will be destroyed inside this function. So don't get confused. This is basically scope is. This a is actually overridden by this. But if you don't define a here, let's comment it out and let's try to print this. Now it will give 20. So what happens when we try to print this a inside this functional block? First it will try to find, is there any a in this code block? If it is present, then it will just print this value. But if it couldn't find a inside this block, then it will search for the outer block, and it will find that yes, in the outside of the block a is already defined and the value is 20, then it is printing 20. Now in the outside, if a is not defined, then it will definitely give you throw in error. So that is how scope works in Python. Let's take another example. X equals to assign some value 30, and now define some function 1, and just pass some argument x, and now want to print x here. So here the name of the parameter of this function is same as the variable name. So now let's try to invoke the function1 and pass some argument 10, and then later just print x. Let's put some comment inside fun, and here outside fun, right? Now let's try to execute the code. When you run the code, so inside this function you can see this argument actually printed. Whatever we have passed, this is printed, not 30. But in outside of this function, print 30. So when function is invoked, whatever value we pass as an argument, that is basically printed inside this. So don't get confused. While we solving problems, we might take same name parameter that is already defined in variable. But when we invoke the function, only whatever the value we have passed as an argument, that will be printed inside this function. So this is all about scope in Python. Now I think you have understood what is scope in Python. So thank you. That's it for today. See you in the next video.